Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, and this, our 28th episode in the Band Talk series. As always, I appreciate you taking your time to listen and hope that you will continue to let your friends and colleagues know about our Band Talk podcast. Today we have a special conversation with a young man who is carrying the torch high and bright for one of our nation's most historic band programs. Joliet Central High School in Joliet, Illinois, was the first high school band to perform for the Midwest Clinic. It was the second year of the Midwest, and they played on Friday evening in 1947. Joliet has had 5 directors in their history that dates back to 1912, and this band has a history of working with the likes of Sousa and Goldman and so many other giants of the band world. Today, Joliet, like so many areas in our world, is a different place at a different time. But the tradition of striving for excellence continues. Our conversation today is with Donald Stinson, director of bands, who is in his 5th year at Joliet. Don grew up in Joliet, was in the Joliet band, and you are going to hear a very powerful conversation. One that talks about the history of the band and gives us a unique insight into the philosophy that guides him. Don is a can-do, will-do guy, and he finds a way to turn what others look at as negatives into positives. He has an incredible ability, as you will hear, to build bridges and generate support from his students, his administration, and his community. So get out your notebooks. You're going to hear some things I know you're going to want to remember. We'll be right back with our conversation with Donald Stinson, Director of Bands at Joliet Central High School, in just a minute.
ThePodcastingStore.com is your one-stop shop for the finest in podcasting, remote and virtual teaching, and amplification tools. ThePodcastingStore.com features leading brands like Audio-Technica, Heil microphones and headphones, Rolls Electronics, Rode microphones, PreSonus, Yamaha, Focusrite interfaces, Roland, and Blue Yeti. With a product mix compiled by experienced educators and podcasters, ThePodcastingStore.com focuses on providing products that assist you in more clearly communicating your message to your audience, whether you're an educator, podcaster, or hobbyist. ThePodcastingStore.com. Visit them soon.
Well, I remember it being a Thursday night that I was invited to go to Joliet, Illinois, and to rehearse a middle school band. Joliet had a famed band program, both at the high school level. They have a separate district for the middle school. And anyhow, I'm rehearsing this band, and I remember that there was this trumpet player. He was sitting in the 3rd row. I think he was like the 3rd or 4th seat in on my right-hand side. And he was not engaged with what was going on in the rehearsal. And I remember I called him out on it in the rehearsal. And lo and behold, who would have ever known that, I don't know how many years later, this guy shows up as a student at Vandercook, was one of the finest students I ever had in my life. I couldn't believe he still said hello to me. He just did such incredible work. He continues to do incredible work. He's still a student, but he's also a dear colleague and a friend, and someone that I'm just honored to have join me on the podcast, because he has a couple of his own podcasts, and he's been a mentor to me in me preparing this podcast. And I can tell you, he's never called me out, probably, but he owes me one along the way. So I want to welcome Donald Stinson, the director of bands at Joliet Township High School. Don, thanks for joining us.
Oh my goodness, that was an intro. I was thinking about that today, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to make sure I avoid that.
Why would you want to avoid that, Don?
No, that was a funny, it was funny to think about that, because I think that was our first encounter, and I was a very moody middle school kid, and I have this face that just doesn't, show much emotion, You
have a face for podcasts, is what
I have a face for podcasting. That's right. You say that, and it's funny because you'd say, "Oh, who would have thought they'd come to Vandercook?" There's not a lot of people have seen this photo, but my 5th grade band photo, I'm the only one not wearing a band uniform. I forgot to wear my band uniform, so I'm in a gray sweatshirt and jeans. And that's the only future band director in the photo there. And you knew my mom, so I was petrified about my mom finding out. And she didn't find out until the next year when the yearbook came out. So I carried that around for a year with me not wearing a uniform, etc. It was a fun time.
Oh, man. Well, before we get into talking about you and your great work at Joliet Township High School, fill in our listeners in on where you grew up and how you got involved with music, Don.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually grew up mostly in Joliet, Illinois, and we lived in quite a few different places when I grew up. Kind of some surrounding areas, Chris Hill, etc., and finally settled in Joliet when I was about 8 years old. And I was chosen to play trumpet. When I say chosen, I was told to play trumpet when I was in 4th grade because my brother was a trumpet player. And I think you've met my brother Bob before, but my brother is in real estate and works for a company in Chicago. But he was a trumpet player in Cheney Manji. He had George Perard as band director, and then he went to Lockport High School. And he was this all-star trumpet player, full ride for college, played at Disneyland, and decided he wanted to go the sales route. So he still does trumpet just, for his own enjoyment. So my mom wanted another trumpet player in the family because my brother played it. We didn't have a lot of music. She was an accordion player and only did a few lessons when she was younger. My sisters did some clarinet. So joined the band in 4th grade. My band directors were Mr. Wesley Russell and Mr. John Armstrong at that point over at Taft Elementary and Hufford Junior High, and went through those programs. I think I went through every single offering there was in Joliet for education and for music. Eventually ended up at Joliet Township High School Central Campus under Mr. Ted Liga. Went to Joliet Junior College with Mr. Jerry E. Lewis, and a few other stops on the way there, and here we are today.
So what are your memories about growing up in Joliet in the elementary system, the junior high system, and then, of course, of the Joliet band? What are your memories from that?
Yeah, so if people out there aren't familiar, Joliet is a very storied town when it comes to music. So you might know some pop culture from a few different things. If you've seen the Blues Brothers movie, for example, the film opens up with Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi over at the Joliet Correctional Center. So a lot of people know about that. We've been in a few other movies because of those things, but we were a very industrial town, some steel and limestone, and around the early 1900s, we have this, band movement. We're kind of one of the areas where the band movement begins, both in the high school and the junior high program. And I'd actually be remiss to leave out the American Legion Band as well. So if, no matter what age you were, you had a fantastic band program out there. So I bring up that history because if you were a student in Joliet, not only did you learn about that history, but you got to be a part of that history. So just a brief synopsis of it. if we were to talk about some just highlights of those programs, the Joliet Township program goes back to 1912. We've had 5 directors, including me, since that time. The Joliet Grade School Bands was and continues to be a very storied program as well. Their famous director at that point was a guy named Charlie Peters, who put out quite a few band methods. And I've got some of these things I posted online, but when we talk about some highlights, Joliet Township Band, they played for like every president up through, I think, maybe Eisenhower or so at that point, played for the Rockettes. They were judged by Sousa to be the best high school band in the country, won all these national championships, and the grade school holds some similar accolades as well. So we all knew about these things. We knew that the Joliet Township Band was the first band to appear at the Midwest Clinic, first high school band ever. The Joliet Grade School Band followed suit, I think, soon after that as one of the first middle school bands. And, as a student growing up in Joliet, the other part I'll say about it is it's not the richest area in terms of finances. And it's a very working class town. And as of recent times, and I say recent, past 20 years or so, the income is going down a little bit more. But the band was a source of pride of the town. And it was something that a lot of parents wanted their kids to be in, because maybe parents were like mine and they wanted something good for their kids. They weren't sure exactly what to do, but they knew the band could be that answer. So a little bit of a long-winded answer, but almost every experience I have with growing up in that band was positive of some sort. It was a lot of work. It wasn't always fun, but we had these instructors that knew about this history and knew, that, hey, we have something that we're all a part of and something that's bigger than us, but we also have to carry this thing on simply by sitting down, doing some hard work, sounding good, answering to the alumni, things like that.
Well, your high school band director, Ted Liga, I mean, he's a legend in the band directing world. I mean, anybody who had ever heard a Joliet band, if they had not heard of Ted Liga or Joliet, came away with the knowledge that this guy knew what the heck he was doing. I mean, his bands were like unbelievable. So tell us about a typical Joliet rehearsal under Mr. Liga's direction.
Yeah, here's the fun thing about a lot of what I'll talk to you about tonight is that we're told to teach a certain way and we're told to engage students a certain way. And what I experienced in Joliet was a lot of the opposite of that. And I mean this with all love and respect to Mr. Liga, but his rehearsals were very boring. His rehearsals were a little monotonous at times. And I remember thinking back, though, as a student that, this wasn't always fun. However, what came about these rehearsals was these opportunities that we got to either, which was pretty cool, playing some great stages somewhere. But I think our favorite parts in rehearsal was the great sounding chords we could get just in the band room, which is a lot of wood and plaster. So when I talk about these rehearsals with him, he's a very soft-spoken man. He's a very big man, 6'3", 6'4", I think. And we would have these rehearsals that sometimes he would spend 43 minutes on 2 notes. We had a piece called Sursum Corda, translated Lift Up Your Hearts. It's by Edward Elgar, and it is arranged by Bruce Houseknecht, who's our second director of bands at Joliet. And Bruce Houseknecht arranges this piece, and it opens up with like 2 B-flat chords. Bum, bum. I'm probably not singing a B-flat, sorry. But we spent over 40 minutes one time in class going over these 2 notes. And I remember telling some other band directors about that. And they said, oh my gosh, we just have to move on. And we wouldn't be able to, do that. The kids wouldn't do that. And I remember all of us sitting there and going, well, we didn't want to do it either, but we knew we had to do it. So I bring up those 2 notes because that speaks to how meticulous Mr. Liga was. But on the other hand, there's some quotes that I'll never forget from him. And one of his big quotes all the time was that there's strength in beauty. And he would talk about, music. I think he took this from Pablo Casal's, music being a series of rainbows. He loved Dr. Beejan's band. Dr. Beejan's second year at U of I, which I think was 1970. Or I'm sorry, first year at U of I. Mr. Liga drove out in a snowstorm, hears Dr. Beejan's band. He says it's one of the first times he leans forward and hears this expression. So we got this technical drive. We also had this drive towards expression. And the best part about all this, and I come back to the beginning where I said, basically alluded to, Joliet's kind of a low-income town now, working-class town in some areas. But the greatest part about Mr. Liga was that he didn't care about that, in the sense of he didn't think that should stand in our ways. And I should say he was a graduate of Joliet Township as well. But this was a guy that said, it doesn't matter where you came from. We're going to be able to complete something here with hard work, and we're going to take this to the next level. So I start off and I say the rehearsals were a little bit boring, a little bit monotonous, but by the end of the rehearsal, we didn't want to leave. We were the band that the bell would ring, and we would just keep playing the piece. He would walk off the podium and go into the office. We'd keep playing. We'd keep finishing whatever piece that it might have been at that point. But just in terms of the inspiration, it was something else to be in his band and to work with him. My favorite part of him too was he would do a trick question at the beginning of the year, and he would ask everybody. He'd say, "What's the ideal band to sound like?" And we'd, especially as freshmen, would raise our hand. We'd want to impress them, and we'd say, "Oh, you want to sound like this college band, or you'd want to sound like the President's Own?" And he'd go, "Eh." He goes, "I don't want to sound like any band." And he said, "I want to sound like the Chicago Symphony Orchestra." So in the history of Joliet bands, we've always had these large groups, and when you go to that golden era of the band, 50s and 60s, he would always talk about those bands just played a little bit different back then. And what he was always striving for was, he said, he goes, "I would go listen to the symphony orchestra," and he goes, "I want to hear strings in the band." And if you go on YouTube, you can find some Joliet recordings. One of them is him doing the whole suite. And I've never heard the third movement sound like this. So right when the melody comes in the third movement, you would think it's a cello section playing, and it's not. And it was just something he was able to do with balance. But I think the big important part of this was the expression. And I think what it all comes back to is, how is rehearsal with Mr. Liga? I'm getting chills about it now, because what happened was he was able to make a whole bunch of 14 through 18-year-olds believe that they had some expression inside of them, and they had some high work ethic, and he was able to get that out of us. And he believed in us, and we believed him, and it was just a great experience. And we have alumni bands, but I'll tell you what, talking about this now, I wish I could go back for one rehearsal.
So what happened when things didn't go well in rehearsal? How did he respond? Being a soft-spoken guy, he obviously probably didn't raise his voice, did he? Did he holler at you or throw a music stand, or what did he do?
No, he was so soft-spoken. He had such a dry sense of humor. And so there were, he was the most kind and gentle man, but there were also some pretty old school things. Like, you weren't allowed to yawn. So if he caught you yawning, he'd say, and I can't do a very good Mr. Liga impersonation, but if he caught you yawning, you'd hear "Hey, Stinson, it looks like feeding time at the zoo over there. Why don't we knock that off?" So it was one of those things where I go back to that 42-minute thing. If something didn't go well, he kept going at it. I can remember times where there'd be, a bass clarinet player that just wasn't getting something. And Mr. Liga was never that guy that said, "Okay, we've tried it 3 times, we're going to go on." He was the guy that basically said, we're going to do it, and it's going to take time right now, and we're going to go at it. But there was really no sense of giving up on that whatsoever. Would he get frustrated? I think so, but he would kind of just maybe sigh a little bit, and we'd switch pieces and go on from there. But there was no wasted time. We eventually would get to a point in November, December, where we wouldn't even warm up anymore, because he would say that's what the symphony did, right? He goes, the symphony warms up, the conductor comes out, and they just start going. So that's how our rehearsals ended up being in November. He would walk out, and we played straight, and that was the part where, again, going back to your question, like, what if something didn't go well? I mean, there was always something else to work on. I think
Right.
that's maybe the answer there.
So you graduate from high school, you go on to Joliet Junior College, and then you, after a short stint, after you graduated from Joliet Junior College, you spent a short stint at Illinois State, and then you transferred to Vandercook. And I was honored, like I said in my intro, to have you in the band. And you worked in the band office. And so for just a moment, besides all the information you obviously gained in the classrooms, what are some of the most important takeaways you had from your college days? Those things that happened outside of the classroom that really helped in your growth and development.
I think what I have to go back to first is starting at Joliet Junior College. And my trumpet professor, Jerry E. Lewis, was so helpful in terms of just helping me with discipline and consistency. And we'll probably talk about that later. But I know from Jerry, it's one of those things where I feel like if I didn't try to do a good job, there were too many people in my corner, starting all the way back to elementary school. But Jerry E. Lewis, I had him as a trumpet teacher probably from about my freshman or sophomore year in high school. So I was taking lessons from Joliet Junior College, getting elective credit there. And my trumpet teacher before him was a guy named Jeff McMillan, who I think did a great job, helping with me from the start there. So what I took from Jerry especially was this whole deal. I'll never forget him saying, like, if you're going to transfer somewhere, they're going to think that you're just a junior college kid. So we're going to train you twice as much. We're going to push you twice as hard. And that might be kind of like the Joliet way, where we always kind of felt like we were a little rough and tumble. So that was a big thing I took from my time in Joliet and with Jerry. It was what, you might just have to work twice as hard. There's a few other things in college that, there was so much that I took in. And I think when I think about my time at Vandercook, it was, especially in the band rehearsals with you, not only, of course, the musical and the technical moments, but what I remember is you and a lot of the faculty having, I think, what I would call maybe such a respect for life and for personal connections and for these memories, and you would talk about these memories with yourself. I remember a memory one time you were talking about, and I hope I have this right. You were talking once that there were certain things that you would forget, but you never would forget about your dad. I think his name was Mandy, pushing you on a tricycle outside. You said that's one of the memories you'll never forget. And, it's all these things that just weren't about music whatsoever. But I remember especially getting to Vandercook and seeing all of you share these stories about yourselves and how they created a person, not just a music teacher. I'm not saying anything against anybody from before. But it really, to me, brought things to life. And especially when you get to college where you're still trying to find yourself. And I'm 36 now, and I think I'm finding pieces of myself, but I'm not all there yet. But I think at that point, when you're looking for people for guidance, those were my big takeaways from college, is that, these are people. I can be someone like this, but more so I have to instill this respect for life and for passion and for music in my students the way that my instructors are doing for me. So
you graduate from college. That's very nice, by the way.
Thank you.
Your thoughts on that. I mean, that's pretty profound stuff for a college kid to kind of realize at the time. That's pretty impressive. So you graduate from Vandercook, you go to Morris High School, you get a job as Morris High School, then you go on to Naperville North, and you were there for a few years. And then upon the retirement of Mike Fisk, your predecessor at Joliet, you became the 5th band director in that high school's history, like you talked about, and it has such a storied history. When you got named the band director, there had to be certain feelings that came about. So what were those feelings when you assumed that job? What were you thinking?
Yeah, when it was my dream job since I was probably 14 years old. And I walked into the band room, and if you've never seen the band room at Joliet, it's the original auditorium. So the band room's been around since the school was built, like 1898 or so. They converted it to the band room in the 20s, and it's been the same pretty much ever since. There's been a little paint done here and there, but it's very original. In fact, we have, and it sounds like I'm being funny, but I'm not joking about that. Like, it's very original. We have the same desk from the original director, A.R. McAllister. So the desk is from the early, 1910s, 1920s. I haven't told many people this, but my first, time where I get the keys, I get the job, it was so overwhelming, and you think about something for so long and then it happens. So what I was starting to do then was I was still working at Naperville during the day, and then I would start going in at night over the summer. So I was doing some summer lessons at Naperville, and I'd go in at night over the summer at Joliet and start getting things together. And my first day in the office, I sat in there, I just started crying. I mean, it just huge release. And I think it was so many things at that point. I remember thinking about all the people that were in my corner. I remember thinking about the journey to get there. And a lot of this is in my head too, because I know this would not be a job that maybe other people would get excited for. But, to put it in the, the simplest terms, there's no place like home. And then I calmed down, and then I opened the files. And the other thing about Joliet is we've kept everything. So a few samples of what's in the office. We have judging sheets from like 30s and 40s. We have handwritten notes from Edwin Franco Goldman. We have the manuscript from Salvation is Created that Bruce Houseknecht did in his pencil. Ron Nelson was a 1948 or 49 graduate of Joliet. We have his student composition projects. So it's a museum in there. And there are a couple of files, though, like they have files on all the directors. So I opened up Mr. Liga's file in there, and these were just things he kept. And it ranged from thank you notes from preschoolers that he went out and played for. And then my freshman year of high school, there was an invitation to the Midwest Clinic. And accompanying that was a letter from Harry Beejan, Dr. Beejan, that said, Ted, you got one of the finest bands I've ever heard. Next week, you're going to get a letter from the Midwest Clinic. And whenever I tell that to people, they say the Midwest Clinic doesn't invite people to go. Like, you have to apply. But we've got the letter. So I look at this letter, and it would have been my freshman year of high school. And it said, we hear that you have an ensemble that should be playing in the Midwest Clinic. Please contact us. Please submit this, application, etc. And I remember seeing that, and we didn't go. Kind of a side note, we didn't go because Mr. Liga, he would joke around with it, but he would say that he didn't want to play for that many critics. He's a very shy, like Mr. Liga just wanted to play in the band room. But also it took a lot of work to get us going, But I remember I saw that, and then I saw a judging sheet. That same piece, Sursum Corda, we played it at the Illinois Superstate Festival, and there's a huge trumpet solo at the beginning of it. And you can actually find me playing it on YouTube. I'm so nervous. The vibrato sounds like a mariachi playing. And I'll never forget reading that judging sheet. And it was before U of I. And somebody on the judging sheet wrote, great, great, great. And then they wrote, trumpet player, too much vibrato. I was talking about me. And I saw that Mr. Liga crossed that off and just wrote, it's okay, next to it. And I remember looking back at that going, no, maybe there was a lot more vibrato, but I like that he allowed me to kind of have my personal flair to it. So I say that because I start reading through those things, and then the tears just start coming again. Because, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's this. I look through all these files. It's so overwhelming because I'm like, I'm never going to get a band to sound like this. And the self-doubt and everything takes over. And I remember after that talking to people and going like, I can't do this job. I said, this is like one of the greatest programs in history. And, but that was back in the day, like when everyone was taking private lessons and when, they just had all this money and everything else. And people told me, they're like, well, you just got to do it. It's not the same in that aspect. And I told that to Mr. Liga. Mr. Liga was funny because he said the same thing to me that he told Mike Fisk when he took over, which was, you can do it. He goes, but I just want you to know, as soon as the school year starts, you're going to be too busy to even worry about all this stuff. And he was right. The school year starts and you're so busy trying to do everything. And that was it. Our first rehearsal with the band, I'll never forget. I'm not one that's big for icebreakers. I'll never forget my first rehearsal with the band. We sat down. They got their instruments out as a summer rehearsal, and I said, "Hi, I'm Don Stinson. You're the Joliet Central Band." I said, "I'll get to know you later. You'll get to know me, but let's go. We got some work to do." And we played for 2 hours straight. And then we talked. And I know some people might say, like, well, maybe you want to get to know the kids, maybe you want this, but I wanted to set some expectations for them. And I wanted to show them too that, like, we can get a lot of stuff going right from the start in terms of our sound, in terms of our technique, and in terms of our work ethic. But the big thing with that was it just felt like home right away.
Yeah.
So very, very overwhelming. And at the same time, there's still times now where, again, this is in my head, this is still my dream job. And, there's something to be said to, again, give back to the place that gave you just so much.
Well, you have a great reverence for Joliet. It's pretty obvious. Anybody could tell that with what we chatted about this far. And, we hear the history and incredible musicians and remember those bands that amazed us. But, you kind of alluded to a little bit about the student makeup at Joliet. So bring us up to speed on the Joliet community, if you can, the socioeconomic makeup of the school and of the band that you have.
Sure. And here's, this will lead into something here, but my advice for any band director out there, by the way, is to go online and look at, in Illinois, we call them our school report cards. In other states, sometimes they call them accountability reports. But they tell you everything about your school. They tell you racial demographics. They tell you free reduced lunch. They tell you attendance rates, mobility, who's moving in and out, etc. And if you haven't done that yet, that's been one of the most powerful tools that I think is out there. And especially in terms of trying to make your band look like your school and look like your community. So that kind of leads into the community of Joliet. I'm going off memory right now, but I think the city of Joliet is probably around maybe a 10 or 15% poverty rate. But Joliet Central High School is closing in at 75% low-income students. So most of the people that are reported low-income, they are kind of concentrated towards Joliet Township High School Central Campus, which is this big castle-looking school on the east side. I think right now we're about probably 65% Hispanic, and then I believe it would probably be about, maybe 25% white, remainder African American. And in terms of the band looks a lot like the school, and in both in racial demographics and both in socioeconomic demographics. So that's a little bit about where we're at. What does that mean for a band program? Well, band's expensive. And music is expensive. So we have some barriers that are in place, but luckily the school does just a phenomenal job of removing some of those barriers, whether, of course, it's helping students with instruments or fees or things like that. We're very blessed. We have an instrument inventory that's huge, but some of it's old. Some of it's not usable anymore. We have a contrabass. We have a contrabassoon with a double-digit serial number on it, and I don't know how much it's worth, but a company quoted us like $7,000 or $8,000 to get it fixed. So, what I heard from Mr. Liga, he said, "No one will ever buy you another one. Just leave it upstairs for now." So this I think you asked about, what are some challenges with that?
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
with such a diverse
yeah,
student body, I mean, what are the challenges you face as a band director?
yeah. Here's the funny thing is it's not challenges from the students; it's challenges from everybody else that has preconceived notions about people. And this is where I think I can say certain things growing up as a student in a low income area, and my parents were interesting. They we didn't always look like we didn't have much money. I found out later on that my parents were just terrible with money and went into a whole bunch of debt. And I, in high school, eventually had to take on some jobs to help them pay off credit card debt and things like that. And that's kind of, I don't want to say that's the typical story out in Joliet, because that's not fair to say at all. But we have a lot of situations either like that, or people that are in some unfortunate situations and have some barriers in place, both financial and of course social barriers, racial barriers, things like that. And what I hope everybody kind of maybe takes from this here is that, going back to Mr. Liga here as well, just because you're low income or just because you're so and so does not mean you don't have the capacity um, for a good work ethic and intellect and musicality. So, what we have at Joliet is I sit down, it looks like America, and we have kids that they work and they sound great, and they come back every day and they do the work, and they're just like kids. And then we have other people though that come in and say like, "Oh, I was afraid to come here, but oh, it's actually okay." Or we have people that think in general low income kids aren't capable of much. In fact, when we talk about low income kids, um, their biggest barrier isn't that they don't have money. Their biggest barrier is that their teachers sometimes just don't believe in them, and their teachers aren't pushing them enough. They're not giving them enough response time when they ask them questions. They're not expecting from them the same thing that they would expect from a kid from a more advantaged background. So that's I guess I'm sorry, the stereotype that I would love to break, is that just because you're low income doesn't mean you have to have low standards.
You're taking your philosophy in life and your philosophy is teaching. I mean, you took a question that deals with the negative, Don, and I don't know you know this, but you just turned it into a positive, and I just think that's who you are, man. You find, I mean, you are the guy that will sit down in a pile of horse manure and look for the pony. I'm telling you. I mean, I just love it. So let's go to the other end of the spectrum, just for a second. You talk about the challenges. So what are your biggest joys you get from the job?
So when, of course, we're talking a pre-pandemic situation here, but the joys of this again are this. Gosh, it's like a time warp in that room. And I say that I've described the room. The room hasn't changed. It's very classic looking. It's the same podium from the original director, etc. And I say that, like, we talk about the director, but the big thing is these students that come into the classroom and sit down and they know the story of the program, but more so they want to create their story of it. And we have a few examples I can think of this, but I'm not kidding when I say there's 2 points of the Joliet band that are my favorite things ever. And the first one is the sound. Okay, we hold a large symphonic band for our advanced group, and it typically is between 75 and 85 students, and that's for a variety of reasons. I just still love that sound. Also, working in a low income area, sometimes we have rehearsals where attendance isn't quite so good. And when you have 10 or 15 kids missing from an 85 person rehearsal, you still got a band, right? We still have the parts covered. That part helps quite a bit. But, some of our favorite parts of this is you look down and you see, man, everybody's different. Everybody looks different. Everybody's dressing different. Everyone's acting different in a sense. And then we get a chord. And when we finally get a chord in tune, and in our just beautiful cathedral wooden band room, this thing just rings forever. It's so fun to look down at the freshman who hasn't heard that before that just goes, oh. And then it's so fun to see the senior that's really cool, that doesn't show much emotion. Maybe his name was Don Stinson, and then he just goes, oh, and we just kind of have this connection together with 85, 86 people in that group there. One of the other things, and I think this speaks really well to band culture, is that after rehearsal, we're the only group in the school that has their own private lunchroom. And what happens is that the band students are allowed to eat lunch in the band room at Joliet. And that happened originally because they didn't have enough space in the room, but it was a tradition that kept going. And I say that from the standpoint, like, I don't want to take away from the beauty of music and everything, but what I'll say is we just really go hard at a rehearsal. And sometimes the students and I leave not being too happy with each other at the end of rehearsal sometimes, because maybe it was tough. Maybe we had to get through something. And the bell rings, people get their lunch, and then they sit down, and it's like, boom, business time is over. And now here's this next part where the kids get to be kids. And what are they doing? They're talking about band. They're getting instruments out. They're playing. And this is like, not to sound like Beauty and the Beast, but it's that tale as old as time with bands. You can't keep them out of the band room, right? They want to come back to this. They feel comfortable there. It's kind of their place of sanctuary. So I think, it's like anything else. It's just these things that we're so proud of. But, again, going back to that tradition part of it, that's the huge thing too that we're proud of. Not necessarily where we get to play, not necessarily, any awards or anything like that, but just the fact that, like, we get to do this every single day. And a bunch of kids, like, since 1912 got to do that as well. Most of them in the same room. I don't know. It's really almost ethereal to think that we get to do this and we've got this connection to just thousands of other people.
So have you put any special programs in place since you took over at Joliet? Anything new that you've done that you feel has made a difference in the program?
Yeah, we got rid of all practicing outside of the school day.
Say that again?
We got rid of all practicing outside of the school day. We just didn't require it anymore. And we can come back to that. I know there's probably a record scratch from some people going, what? We implemented a few other programs as well. I stole this from Bensonville. Bensonville used to do this, maybe they still do this, Young Musicians Mentor Band. And it was over the summer. I know Miss Dolan from Vandercook was a part of that as well. And they would do like a summer program for like sixth graders through, I think, high schoolers, and they would do a band in the summer. Okay. So we started that at Joliet, and one of our sender school directors, great guy, Scott Barnes, works this program with me. But we added a little twist to it. So in the summers, we started this mentor band program where the junior high students get to play in a band, and then we run it for 2 weeks. And the high school students come in and assist adult section leaders during the first week. And then the second week we flip it, and the high schoolers are leading the sectional, and we have the adult in the room just in case something happens. And then the next week after that, we go into our band camp at Joliet. And guess what? We've already had our high school students that have actually taught a real life person how to form an embouchure, real life person how to play B flat, etc. So that's kind of their leadership training. That has been a wonderful success. One of the things I didn't necessarily start, but we've ramped up a little bit more, is we just kind of let anybody in the band that has an interest in this. And I do what Mr. Liga used to do. Mr. Liga used to take a beginner or a less experienced student, and he would put them between two experienced students, and that kid would just rock it in terms of their progress. So we did that. We had a student. She came to me her sophomore year and wanted to play an instrument, and I said sure. And I know most people wouldn't do this, but she just picked up a horn and played it well. I gave her one of those Japanese winds training DVDs. I said, hey, take this home over the weekend, see what you can do with it. Comes back, she says, hey, I had no notes before I started. Now I have 10 notes. Cool. We have 2 levels of band at Joliet, so I actually decided to put her in the advanced level band with only being able to play 10 notes and not reading much music. And about a year later, she's playing the horn solos at Super State in pieces like Three Fantastic Dances by Tarina. So it's very unconventional in that sense, where you ask other programs that we've implemented. There's the mentor program. We've eliminated the practice logs and the practice. Not that Mike was doing much of that stuff anyway, but we just didn't really go at the kids about practicing at all. And if a student has an interest for it, regardless of experience, like, we find a place for them. And you think about that too. If a kid wants to join band but they missed that boat in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, you have like 80% of the success is already there, because that kid, you don't have to convince that kid to be in band. They're asking you to be in band. They want to be there. They're saying, I'll do whatever that needs to be done to do this. And those have become just some of the best students.
So let's shift gears a little bit. Don, I know that you're in the final stages of publishing a book.
Yeah.
From our conversations together, I know this started out as an article, and it just grew and grew and grew. So tell us about why you began to write this article and what the article was and kind of how it grew into a book.
It grew into a book because I can't ever shut up. I just keep talking. That's what I'm very verbose. We had an incident at a festival a few years ago, and I called you about this, and you probably remember it. And we played at this festival, and we all had the same tuxedos as everybody else, and we had shiny instruments, and it's blind auditions to get in this festival, so everybody's at least good. And I'm not saying that to blow my own horn there at all. I'm saying that everybody's on similar levels there. There's at least a baseline of it. And they call their name at the end, and again, we understand, we know who we are, but we also understand how other people see us. So if you're from Joliet, like you kind of have to be not only on your best behavior, but a level above that, because people just want their stereotypes to come true. So they call our name, and somebody in the crowd in front of one of our kids goes, "Who's that band?" And another kid goes, "Oh, that's that ghetto band." And their director is next to him, and the director starts laughing about it too. And was I mad? And I didn't hear about it until afterwards on the bus. I had a couple kids crying, coming to me. They're like, "Hey, this is what happened." So here's this great performance they had. And for some of them, it was kind of, rained upon by that. The next week in band, I bring it up, and those kids are fine then. And I said, I seem to be more upset about it than you. And then the kids, a couple of them raised their hand. They said, "You know what? We were upset, but we just remembered we're used to it. That's just life." And that made it even worse for me, because at that point, it's like, okay, the fact that you're believing that now, that's terrible, right? And that's terrible that the effect these people had on you. So I started to kind of look at just some of the things we did. I looked at my own background, with being free reduced lunch kid, with going through the program, with teaching students like that. So I started to write an article, and it was basically, I think we're still working on a title, but I think it's basically teaching music to students from low-income areas or underserved areas, and it's called High Needs Monumental Successes. Because when we talk about an underserved school or a low-income school, we talk about high needs. Sometimes the students and the families, they just need a lot to help them out. So I started writing this article about things that we have experienced that other people might not experience. And if you haven't been in a situation like that, like, we just have a higher instance of things happening, like repossessed instruments. We have a lot of student mobility. We'll have tuba players that will move out the week before a big festival. And again, the judges and clinicians don't care. Like, you got to figure that out, right? We have many parents, and I'm sure many more now in our current situation, that are working 3 or 4 jobs. We have students working jobs. We had one kid came to me, and he said, I need to leave marching band rehearsal early. And I've learned over the years to not react and just ask, right? I said, okay, why? And he goes, well, I have to take the pace bus. And if I don't make the 8 p.m. bus, I then have to wait for the 10 p.m. bus. I said, okay, you can go. And then I find out too that this kid is also taking on a job to get bus money to come to band. Like, okay, you can go ahead. You can leave when you need to. Like, obviously you have this motivation to be here, right? So, this article I started writing just kind of became more and more of like what we did, what our students are and are not able to do. Some of our kids can't practice outside of school. They might be sharing an instrument. They might be in an apartment where landlord says no. Right now, we have parents that are working at home, like they're working at a call center, and they're answering calls at home, so they can't have a trumpet in the background. And now school is at home, so we're having to figure out some of those situations. So this article just kind of kept going and kept going. I sent it to a few people, and they said, hey, this is some helpful stuff, but the big thing is kind of the insight about it. And it's a little anti traditional band at some point, because I think with bands, especially at Joliet, we think about this military tradition and we think about everything being uniform and everything the same. And the approach the book takes a little bit is that sometimes we don't need the kids to adapt to our program. Sometimes we need the program to adapt to the kids. And this is never. This is what I always want to get back to. It's like somebody might read that book when it comes out and say, oh, he either lets them get by with a lot of stuff, or there's this, or this, or there's too much understanding. But it is never from a standpoint of lowering our standards, and it is never from a standpoint of not expecting greatness from the students.
So when do you expect the book to come out?
I think, writing a book's hard. And It's hard, and the reason it's hard too, because I submitted the final draft, so they're going to assign an editor soon, and I think we'll see the book within a year. But the hard part about especially teaching in a low income area and education is that things just change so much. So I had the book done, and then the CARES Act came out, which was kind of helping us get some money for schools during the pandemic right now. And then remote learning started getting a little bigger. So, it was one of those things where I just kind of kept writing and writing and writing, but you don't want it to be too bloated. But, in reality, like I said, I believe in a year or less than a year, the book would be out. And this is me being really optimistic and pie in the sky. I hope it's not relevant in 5 years. I know GIA is probably like, stop it, but I hope in 5 years that there's, I don't know, maybe a little bit of movement somewhere, whether it's locally, state, federally, whatever, that helps some of the people that are in the situations that I'm teaching, and then we don't have to worry about some of those things. Is it utopian? Yeah, but that's okay.
Well, Don, since you came to Vandercook to today, through today, of all the things I respect about you, I guess the single thing that sticks out most is your ability to organize, to prioritize, and to execute projects and the things that you do. I think simply said, you're probably one of the most organized and committed and dedicated people I've ever met. Where did you learn all of that, and who helped you develop those skills?
Sure. Jerry Seinfeld, comedian Jerry Seinfeld, had an article I read 10, 15 years ago. All right. And Jerry Seinfeld's like this joke machine. And Jerry Seinfeld had a concept called Don't Break the Chains. And he said that he wanted to write jokes every single day. And he said that he would be fine he'd go 5 or 6 days. And then he would stop, and he'd stop for, 2 or 3 weeks. I'm probably paraphrasing this slightly incorrect. And then he said, what he changed was he got a calendar out. And every day he wrote a joke, he wrote a line through that calendar. And then he got to day 6 and 7, he kept going. And he goes, but then I got to like day 29 of writing jokes. And I didn't want to do it. I was tired. I had other stuff going on. I didn't want to do it. But I looked up, and here's this calendar. And if I didn't do that, I would have broken that chain. So That came at a point in my life, reading that article. That came about 2 or 3 years after I read a book, and it's one of my favorite books. And it's Stephen King. The book is called On Writing.
Love
And
it.
Stephen King, it's fantastic. And what I also love about it is that Stephen King is just such a hypocrite and he'll admit to it. He'll say omit unnecessary words. And if you've ever read it, you're probably still reading it right now. So I read the Stephen King book when I'm in high school, and he talks about passion and how, we don't have a lot of time on this earth, and about how he treats writing and how he does it. So in terms of organization, like, I've always been fascinated by lists. I wasn't always a great student. In elementary school, I was okay. Junior high, I was okay. But in high school, there was a couple of switches that just kind of turned. But there was something, and I wish it was more of a, what do I want to say, a complicated answer than this. There's just something so fun about crossing something off on a list, right? As Dr. Tim would say, sometimes you write something down just to cross it off. So when I got into high school, I remember I was, I would do things like research papers, etc., but I would break everything down to a list. And then what I started doing was to break everything down by time and how it would take. So then when it came to organization, that part was a little bit easier. Okay. Now there's a downside to that, is eventually you get to a point where, are you doing these things for your own intrinsic motivation, or are you doing just to get it done and say, hey, I just got it done? And, I'm wishy-washy on that, because there's some things that, yes, I'm doing it just to get it done, but I also know it's better for me. So I still hold that today. I've actually transitioned a little bit more into the getting things done method. The David Allen, who wrote that book, and one of my friends, Bob, is big on this as well, and has presented on it. But David Allen's big thing, and I tell this to the band all the time too, is that the brain is not for remembering, it's for creating. And to bring it back to band, we talk about that in band all the time, because that's why we need a pencil. And I'll say, if the Chicago Symphony Orchestra has to write down louder on their music, we need to do it too. There's just too much stuff to remember. So I think that organization, to me, it was always something that was fun to do. It was, I think, fun to kind of look at projects and how you could put them into fruition. And it's also been a great skill, I think, to try to hand down to students as well. And one of the big things in the David Allen book too was, like, you can't ever clean your garage. That's too big of a task, but you can put the sockets away. You can fold the Amazon boxes. You can put the dolly in the corner, and you can take the rust off the screwdrivers and put them in the right place. So, when we translate that to music, that's always been a great approach. So for me, again, I don't know, I just really get excited about the organization parts, but I've also identified kind of my high energy parts of the day. So for me, in where I'm firing on all cylinders, it's typically a 4:30 a.m. wake up time, and I would get to the school at 5, and I would get all of my work done. And I know you've been there too, like, nobody else is in the building. So I would get all of my work done from 5 to 7:20, because you can, from 5 to 7:20, it feels like 8 hours, even though that's just a short amount of time. It's a really, really nice chunk of time. It's high energy. There's nothing else going on. Because as band directors, as we know, like, I don't know, 90% of our day is reacting. So I can schedule and I can talk about all the things I want during the day, and I can be organized. But if the kid comes to the office and says the clarinet is broken, that now goes to the top of the list no matter what. So I think that organization now has come into the place of, like, now the beginning of the day I do my stuff, so then the rest of the day I can react and do other people's stuff, but also leave and not feel frazzled that,
Stephen Kelly would say, yeah, that rest of that stuff push you in quadrant 1, right?
Yeah.
That urgent and important, the thing you got to get done right now. And
absolutely,
like you do your planning early in the morning. A couple of comments on that. Stephen King wrote that book after he was hit by an automobile. He was almost dead.
Yeah. The real life misery incident.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great book. And there's another book out, that deals with writing that I would really encourage you to read, called Bird by Bird. And it's a lady writer, and she's really, really funny, and she gives great advice too. So, and then
Stephen King. Oh, I'm sorry. I always nobody writes young characters like Stephen King does.
Mm-hmm.
You think about, like, I think it's the end of Stand By Me, where he's like, I never had friends like I did when I was 12, whoever does stuff like that. And to bring it back to band, it always brings me back. When I think about Stephen King stuff, and this is kind of a far stretch, but I always think about the piece, The Hounds of Spring.
Oh, yeah.
And where that piece is supposed to be about childhood exuberance and things like that. My favorite recording of it, and I know some people don't like I like when things are a little bit off, because I know The Hounds of Spring is at a certain tempo. But when I hear The Hounds of Spring, I hear it fast. Bum ba da ba bum ba bum ba 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 ba, because I picture this little kid just running around. Like, they're not slow. They're just bouncing all over the place, things like that. There's that nice, like, little love section of the song. And again, this is wild sounding right now, but I always picture, I'm like, if Stephen King were to write music, it might sound a little bit like that, with all of a sudden, like, Carmina Burana right in the middle of it.
And a little Schoenberg thrown in for just, for just fun. Well, Don, in all your positions, you've developed an incredibly strong and supportive relationship with your administrators. So what's been your approach to working and communicating with your school principals and administration that have helped you garner that support?
I think it's been bringing administrators potential solutions and being as thorough as possible when asking for things. And there's a couple of I'll come clean on a couple of tricks here. I've always been really good at getting money for programs. In some instances, I kind of looked at it, and there was like some typical negotiating tactics, but at the same time, I didn't want the administrator to feel like I was playing them, so I would just tell them what I was doing. So, 1 year we needed like $5,000 for the band, so I asked for $100,000, and they like fell off their chair. They're like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Well, I actually only need this." I said, "But ideally, if we wanted this great program, like, we need $100,000 worth of stuff." And I said, "Here's a line item of what we need. Like, here's the instruments, here's this. We need these instruments because it's buy nice or buy twice, right? If we buy this instrument, it's going to last 2 years. If we buy this one, it's going to last 10 years, but we're going to stretch it to 15, etc." And I remember them kind of laughing about it, and they said, "Okay, how does 18,000 sound?" And, that's more than I asked for. And then I still asked for like another music stand or something after that. So there was that part where I think, there's a little humor involved with it. But whenever I've asked an administrator something, you got to think about what the administrator does each day. And the administrators at our school, I think, and I haven't done any research on this, but I think they might be able to spend a maximum of 30 to 40 seconds on one task before they're interrupted. So, and I'm not joking about that. Like, constant knocking on the door of somebody that needs something. And then here's me in my, band room's right across the hall from the principal's office there. So what helped me with that was, figuring out, hey, here's what we need. Here's how I'd like to get it. I'm going to do all the bids ahead of time. I'm not going to commit to anything. This is why we need it. This is how many kids it can affect. And the more information I gave the administrator, without it being this novel, the better chances we had at getting whatever we needed. But the administrators, the other approach we took with it too is I've been very, very fortunate because the administrators have also realized, like, this is not their money and it's not my money, it's the school's money. So I think part of it was never being shy about those things. I think some people sometimes are a little bit shy and they're a little bit timid about it. But in reality, it's like, we're getting money for the kids program here. When we bring administrators solutions of some sort, it actually can make their day a little bit easier. They can actually make some change since without putting a lot of creative brain power to it, because it's tired thinking all the time and having to solve everybody else's problems there. But I think the other part with it too is that I've always tried to make sure that I looked at it as, it sounds funny, but I looked at as administrators as people and not teachers versus the administrators there, because it's a very, very different job. And school administrators today have a lot on their plate. And just like teachers, those jobs are getting harder and harder and harder. And as I talked about earlier in education, things are changing so much. If you want to see what some administrators do, look at your school board minutes, and you're going to see presentations they had to create. You're going to see line item budgets. You're going to see a whole bunch of stuff. And sometimes we think, oh, they're sitting in their office, they're doing this, they're doing that. So it's been that positive relationship, communicating with the school principals and everybody. I think it's finding out just the best way, like who that administrator is. Some administrators like an email, and I've had some that like an email and they want the entire text of the email to fit in the subject line. And then I have some administrators that when I go talk to them 3 hours later, I'm leaving the office and I'm having to call home and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late. I'm sorry. So it's kind of putting that personal connection to it first. And it's figuring out to where you're coming from for the best of the kids. And it's not a bad thing also to just talk about, what we're doing isn't just good for the band, it's good for the school. And to talk about how it's usually money, right? We're talking to administrators about it's usually money, your time, or something. We're talking about how that fits into the school and the school's mission.
Don, you're incredible. This has been incredible. So I got one more question. We could talk for another 2 hours. I mean,
I know.
I could keep going all night because I just love this. So before we get to the last question, we're going to do this again. Okay, we're going to continue to go part B of this podcast at some point in the near future. Okay, say yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, you got to say that with kids. It's like, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. You want to do this, right? Say yes, and they'll
say yes.
Right. Okay, so in addition to being the director of bands at Joliet and writing a book and teaching classes for some colleges, universities, and working on your own advanced degree, you've also found time to have 5 children. And I think you have 5.
Not on purpose. Yeah.
And I know that you get great joy in being with your family. So for those teachers or people out here listening that are committed to their work like you are, have a family, how do you balance all that?
Well, you don't. I mean, you really don't. It's very, very difficult. But I think there's some attempts to it. And for me, I talked about waking up early. So I'm kind of lucky. I don't require a ton of sleep. And when I wake up early, that allows me to get what I need done for the most part in the morning. And that then allows me to have this time at home. And now our house is very odd. There are 7 people in our house. And I know that's not like the biggest family some people have ever heard of, but it's a large family for us. And just to tell you what it looks like, on Saturday, breakfast is 18 eggs, 1.5 pounds of bacon, 6 cups of oatmeal, an entire gallon of orange juice. Like there's a lot of people. So when we look at the balance of everything, it really is, that's the most frightening part, is that if the band doesn't sound good, that's okay. If I screw up my kid's life at home, though, that's a whole other deal, right? So, I kind of took that organization approach as well. And this, I'm not trying to make this sound like it's the database in a spreadsheet, but it's almost like, a wedding. And when you get married, I remember they told us, like, you're if you spend a minute with each guest, like that's the entire reception, right? So you got 100 guests, you're going to spend a minute with each guest. That's 100 minutes. And I remember kind of looking back at that. And there was a time where there was so much stuff with the band that there would be times where I didn't talk to 1 or 2 of my kids at all during a day. Like I would see them, but we just didn't talk. And I know it sounds bad, but I'm saying it in public because that's the reality of it. And I remember sitting back at that going like, you know what, that can't happen anymore. So we make conscious efforts of course to make sure each kid has what they need. My oldest Evelyn is 11 years old now. My youngest Violet is 1.5 years. Violet, who by the way I gave she was born on our front step, so I delivered her. They still charge us for delivery, by the way, just so you know. I'm not. That's not a joke. Still paying her off, right? But but when we look at that part of it, I think it is stepping back. And we've made lists. I've made lists with the kids, and I said, hey, this is what I want you to be able to do before you leave home. These are things that I would like you to experience, and some of it's travel. Some of it's some type of creation, playing musical instruments and things like that. But I think when you get to a point, and like I said, I'm 36 now. I got to a point where I realized, what, the principal, I love our principal, but he's not more important than my child. And an email would come from the principal, and I'd be in the middle of dinner and I'd start responding to it or something. And I said, you know what? And I'm going to quote one of my best mentors ever, and I know he won't believe this, but it's Steve Piter. I remember I was doing some things like that, and Steve goes, you know what? We're not holding nuclear launch codes right now. Like, you can put your phone down. Like, you don't have to score study. You don't have to do this. And Steve has been incredibly influential on me as a person, as a teacher. But again, simple answer when it comes to the kids, there's a lot of them at our house, but they're all their own unique person. And we are literally scheduling that time for them, not because, maybe some people might say like, oh, if you're scheduling it, obviously it's not that important. Like, no, it is so important that we are making sure each kid gets that time that they need, and nothing, comes in the way of that. So, it's been great. It's not a perfect answer. Again, we are realizing more and more that we have no clue what the heck we're doing. But, hopefully our kids look back in 10, 20, 30 years and say, you know what? You didn't screw us up too badly.
Don Stinson, I know you're
what a way to end.
Yeah, no, you're a great teacher. You're a great person. I know you're a great father. You've certainly enriched and blessed my life along the way, and I know hopefully you'll continue to do that. And I just want to say thank you to you, and thanks for joining me on the podcast. And I wish you nothing but the best, buddy. And we'll talk soon.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Of course, it's always a great time to talk with you. And I do thank you for everything you've taught me. Probably one of the biggest lessons I remember was one time in band, you said, listen, practicing is not hard. It's just lonely. And when it comes to a work ethic and when it comes to discipline and everything, that's something I think about every single day. It's not hard. It's just lonely. And sometimes it's okay to be lonely and push through some of these things, because it makes us better and it makes everybody else better.
Don, thanks a lot, buddy. God bless
Thanks.
you. I've heard teachers say that the best trophies they ever got in life was watching the work of their students. Although I had but a small hand in Don's growth and development, I can tell you that being proud of Don and his work at Joliet is an understatement. I hope you heard Don's passion for his school, the band, its history, and the community of Joliet. Regardless of the obstacle, Don will find a way. He has a unique ability to know when to be an optimist and when to be a pragmatist. He proudly embraces the history of those who have come before him, and he is blazing the trail for the future. Don is making a difference in the community, in the school, and in his students and their families' lives. I hope you'll agree when I say the Joliet Township High School Band is in great hands and has a bright future with Donald Stinson as their band director. Well, that's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. We'll be back next week with more great conversations to share with you. Again, please help me spread the word about Band Talk, and I hope you'll join us again. Here's wishing you the best in your life and your life's work. And as always, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.